Hello, and welcome to Learning from Nature, the biomimicry podcast with me, your host, Lily Ehrman. Thanks for tuning in. This episode is a gem of inspiration and motivation. Hear from Giselle Carr about how she has uplifted nature in her work and career in order to benefit people and the planet. Giselle is a design strategist and founder of a life-centered design practice called Stardust, based in Trinidad and Tobago. Previously, she worked primarily in design, marketing, and brand strategy, most recently with a global charity to address climate change through tropical reforestation and women's empowerment. Evolving from design thinking to business leadership and then to sustainable design has made her more specialized but more expansive in her ability to create impact. Giselle enjoys working with bright people on massive, complex problems in service of our collective, thriving future. Also, she does everything with a whole lot of love. Giselle works with fierce compassion to shape brands and tell stories that are meaningful and powerful. Why? Because the 21st century calls for agile, inclusive leadership, new thinking, and a new kind of business. She once heard Bruce Mao describe a designer as a living revolution of possibility, and her aim is to live up to that definition. This is another invitation to take us on a walk in nature with you. Listen in to learn about this important field while you marvel at your local birds, trees, plants, and insects who are the best models for life-centered design and have so much to teach us. Let's jump on in. Welcome, Giselle. I'm so happy to have you here. If you want to do a quick, just little intro to yourself and also let us know your pronouns, that would be awesome.
Oh, okay, thanks. Thank you so much, Lily. I love being here. So, my name is Giselle Carr. I am a design strategist for the past, 15, 20 years or so. And I recently founded a life-centered design practice in the Caribbean called Stardust Life-Centered Design. And I go by she, her pronouns.
Awesome. I'm so happy to have you here. And for everyone listening, Giselle and I have actually worked together in the past. We've been in touch for many years, and so I'm so excited to have you here, Giselle.
Yeah, same here. I'm just stoked. I mean, it's beautiful to see how things evolve too, you know?
Yeah, each of us kind of in our own careers in this space, and me definitely like earlier on, or joined a little later is what I mean to say. And having your support and guidance and inspiration just for this whole process, even though we've never actually met in person, which is wild to me.
No, I know, because it feels so, you feel like just my homie,
Yeah,
so it's all
exactly.
good.
Yeah, and I'm constantly looking to your work, and I'm just motivated by all the
Mm,
projects you have going on and the change you're making in that space in the
wow, thank
Caribbean. So,
you.
yeah, big props to
Thank you
you.
so much. Thank you so much. Yeah, it means a lot to me, and it's wonderful to see all of the things that you're doing as well. I mean, I really feel like this is slow work.
Yeah,
It's got
yep.
to be slow, generational work, and it's super inspiring what you're doing. Super inspiring what you're
Awesome.
doing.
Yeah, thank you for saying that. It means a lot. All right, we're
So
going to jump right
welcome.
in. And
hmm
you
hmm
mentioned life-centered design. So I want you to kind of give us your definition of what life-centered design is.
So for me, life-centered design is about putting life at the center of all of our decisions.
Mm, mm-hmm.
Yeah, so more technically, it's about creativity as a driver of sustainable business. That's how I practice it.
Mm,
I really land in corporate and look for ways to create value for people, planet, and profit.
mm-hmm.
So really what we're doing is, constantly putting life at the center. Sometimes that's society, sometimes that's ecology. Most of the time it involves ecology because, the time that we're living in, climate
Mm-hmm.
change and the major issues that we're facing. So yeah, that's the
Yeah.
definition that I work with.
Such an important practice, I too, I agree in this day and age, and I'm excited to dive deeper into what this practice means for you and kind of how you're actually doing this and how you're applying this in different
Mm,
levels. But
mhm.
first, I want to know maybe a little bit more about your past. Like, how did you first get interested in this field, in life centered design, and maybe even biomimicry, any of those kind of practices?
Yeah, sure. Well, I graduated first, I guess 2005. I was a graphic designer. I was working in a web design company. I was having a blast. I lived in New York at the time. And I just always had this inkling in the back of my mind, like working in corporate was awesome. And at the same time, I always had this love for nature. I always had this passion around nature and a desire to do more in the world. And I
Mm-hmm.
felt very strongly called to do something that would impact other human beings. You
Yeah.
know, I couldn't quite find the languaging around it. I wasn't sure. And eventually I stumbled upon the design management program at Pratt.
Mm.
And that program is specifically about, life-centered design, the whole program. So I was just completely blown away,
Mm.
that this was even a thing, that this existed. The way that the design management program frames it is around triple bottom line design, right? So
Mm-hmm.
again, it's those three value creation, three types of profit, really, which would be people, planet, profit. But then diving more deeply into it and realizing that, okay, this was something that I was deeply passionate about, but there was also that pull towards nature constantly.
Yeah.
And I remember one of our first assignments was to read Janine Benyus's books.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and I remember thinking, wow, I didn't even know this was a thing, like
Mm-hmm.
biomimicry is a thing, And when I look at the landscape, one of the reasons I called my business a life-centered design practice is because life-centered design includes biomimicry.
Yeah.
It's inclusive of that practice. And I feel very strongly about that as well, that we do have to learn from the other species that have figured out how to live on this planet.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, so I mean, it would have started, I guess, around 2009, 2010 was when I first heard about it. And, fast forward a few years, I left New York. I came to the Caribbean. I was working in advertising. I was leveraging the skills I had learned,
Yeah.
but I wasn't necessarily practicing life-centered design in its like fullness,
Yeah.
Like I was really more working on like for-profit brands,
Mm-hmm.
classic advertising stuff.
Yeah. And the space is so new. It's hard to break into an
Yeah.
ecosystem in which is just emerging.
Exactly, exactly. And then as a market, the Caribbean is different. So like some of the issues here are more around social change,
Mm-hmm.
So you find yourself doing brand strategy that might create social value. But again, if you're someone that loves nature, that's kind of in the back of your mind. Like
Yeah.
it's a kind of weirdly visceral thing. You're just like, okay, but we're on this runaway train called
Yep.
climate change. You're just kind of always thinking about it.
Mm-hmm.
So I felt this call for an adventure at my job. And, I was like, I wonder if those biomimicry guys have any, events or things I could attend. And, and lo and behold, this was around 2014, I discovered the immersion
Oh,
in
cool.
Costa Rica. Yeah. And signed up for that, went to Costa Rica for a week and just fell madly in love with the practice all over
Oh,
again.
I'm so jealous. That sounds like an incredible trip.
Yeah, you gotta go if you haven't been. Like
Yeah.
that's oh,
Oh, I was
and
supposed to go
it's
in
like
2020. In 2021.
ah, that's okay.
Maybe one
Soon
day.
come, soon come. Yeah, yeah, soon, soon. Yeah, but that was like, I mean, that was definitely a catalyst for me because it was one thing to read about it, and it was another thing even to live in the Caribbean again, in those ecosystems, in tropical ecosystems, in the
Mm-hmm.
background.
Mm-hmm.
And then a whole different thing to actually go and spend the time in nature, listening, working with other designers and strategists from around the world, being taught by Dana, and just kind of really completely opening up my mind to a different skill set and
Yeah.
possibility and depth of skill set, And I thought, oh my gosh, yeah, I'm asleep at the wheel.
Mm-hmm.
This needs to stop. I need to do this.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yes, I mean,
That's amazing.
it it took a few years, but it was really all those things added up,
Yeah.
And when I left advertising, I guess around about 3, 4 years ago, I started working in global reforestation with a charity called Tree Sisters, and I really loved the work we were doing. I loved the impact on climate change, but I realized again, okay, there's this layer of stuff that I'm not getting to do that I know is my calling.
Right. Yeah.
So even though, by all means we were successful, I mean, the campaigns we worked on funded the planting of 7 million trees in 2 years.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so I mean, it was just really, really a lot of fun, making a huge impact. And then it was hard, like you, in 2020, this pivotal moment came where my contract ended, and I was just like, do I want to work anywhere else? What am I actually doing? And Stardust had really been on my heart for some time, for like maybe 2 years, and I just
Yeah.
decided I would just go for it, just start my own practice and see what happens.
Wow. Yeah,
And
and
that's
those
it.
moments can be really scary, but very rewarding in the long
Yeah.
term for sure.
Yeah, I believe so. I believe so.
But yeah, jumping right in and just like can be really terrifying. And I think it's especially important in this space. I've been recognizing this in myself as I've been, creating these classes and teaching and working to start this smaller company. It's like I am qualified to do this. It's the forefront of
Hmm.
my mind. I'm excited by this. I'm trained in this. I, can practice this, and I'm qualified, and I'm worthy of being here in this space. And that's been tricky, I think, to navigate because the space is so new and there's so few people actually doing it, which is a huge goal of this podcast too, which is why I'm really excited to have folks like you join and share like how you're doing it and why you're doing this, just to share with other people that they are capable of doing it, and we can create a world in which life is centered and we're learning from nature at the core of every decision.
Yeah, absolutely. I believe so. I mean, if I were to, I mean, I definitely feel you on the idea of qualifications, though. I remember, I think I did a year of an MBA in marketing before I found Pratt. And I mean, it's not to denigrate the school. It was an awesome school. It was my alma mater. And and I remember after a year, I was like, wow, okay, this is what a traditional MBA feels like. This
Yeah.
isn't for me.
Yep.
It was intense. And then I realized, okay, everyone in my class, technically, like so many of like the conversation was so different. They owned houses. They were so much better off than my designer classmates, let's just
Yeah.
say, right? And I was like, okay, do I belong here? But
Right.
then I realized like that ecology conversation was nowhere. Like it was
Right.
literally
Yeah.
nowhere, Lily.
Yeah.
And I said, you know what, I'm not gonna do this. This is not how I'm gonna do business.
Yeah. And part of the
You know.
reason we're in trouble right now, people aren't exposed to and interested in these topics that are inclusive, like, understanding ecosystems and life centered design when they're doing MBAs or building companies and everything. So,
Mm-hmm.
yeah,
Mm-hmm.
a huge gap, I think. So, glad you switched
Yeah.
over. Glad you're here.
Yeah, me too. Me too. I mean,
And
it's
also,
really
like, yeah,
something.
how can we get this kind of thinking into more programs? That's kind of the headspace I'm in right now. Like, how do we infiltrate
Yes.
education with this kind of thing? So, right from the ground, right from the start, people are excited about learning from nature and the brilliant, designs that are out there in the natural world rather than creating more
Yes.
problems. So, yeah,
Yes. Yeah, it
it's a
is.
big problem for sure.
Yeah. It's the privilege of a lifetime, I think. We get to do this work.
Yeah, yeah,
We
I
get to do
agree.
this work at this time. And I just feel like, we've had this convo before about the next 30 years or so, this whole generation, I think this is what it's going to be about.
Yeah, I
This is
agree.
what it's going to be about. And I take heart in that because I just know it's a relief in a way that it's been so bad because there's no way we could go back to it.
Right,
There's
exactly.
literally no way,
Yeah,
physically no way,
yep.
so humanity's found its edges. So we've just got to forge ahead and look for what's new, what's going
Yeah.
to work.
And these fields, life centered design and biomimicry and bio inspired design, are just so much more hopeful and well rounded
Hmm.
and bright and brilliant. And it offers us this really incredible light to follow and path to build forward that's not just, meeting the status quo, but it's actually beautiful and brilliant and hopeful. And that's what really inspires me because, especially coming from the background of a little bit of doomsday narrative around climate change, which I think we're all familiar with, right?
Yes.
It's this practice brings us joy in a way, even in that ecosystem that can be really sad sometimes. Like you were mentioning, we're facing the next, 50 or 100 years, there's going to be a lot of challenges, a lot of challenges. And with these tools, we can be equipped to be more hopeful, I think, and find joy in this work.
I think so. It really gives you a roadmap and a plan. And if not, a manifesto,
Yeah.
So no one can chart the future necessarily, but there are a set of rules we could follow. There are things that we can experiment with,
Yeah.
and we're still learning.
Yep.
We're still learning. No one, not one single human being that has lived before us today has figured this out.
Right.
So it's again, it's a bit reassuring in that sense because then it's just like, okay, we're just gonna keep doing our best.
Right.
We're just gonna keep doing our best,
Yeah.
and follow the things that are hopeful because that's how you create more of it.
Exactly.
Is just be of service to the hope.
Yeah. And speaking to that, something I would love to hear, just kind of the things you're working on right now. Like, how are you applying? What does it look like to apply life-centered design to a career? I know
Sure.
that's a huge question, but I think a lot of listeners would
Sure.
be interested in, like, what does this look like in practice?
Yeah. Well, I mean, for myself with Stardust, I have three sets of services, right? So one is kind of more directly about life-centered design and training companies, training organizations. So I find myself doing a fair number of workshops to create awareness,
Okay.
right? And to
Awesome.
give people tools. That's usually just a lot of fun because it's so new to people
Yeah.
and they just have such a blast. Last year I did a workshop with a group of women in Portugal, and I mean, some of them were crying on this call. Yeah,
Yeah.
they were so moved
Yeah.
because they never really, I think most business owners and people trying to do something quote unquote sustainable or regenerative, they don't quite give themselves permission to have this as a possibility.
Yeah.
And so they don't even approach it from this context. And when they do, it's like the energy just changes in the room completely,
Yeah, it
you
does.
know?
I know what you're talking about. It's like giving me goosebumps right now.
Yeah, people will start the workshop thinking about money or profit or, okay, we're here to learn these things and this is going to be a fun presentation. Yay. And then by the end of it, they're talking about, you know, generational transitions, how they can create this transformation in such a way inside of their business that then lasts for 60 to 90 years,
Wow.
or they start talking about family structures that created generational businesses and how they can transform them. I mean, it's just things that would floor you. Like, I
Yeah.
always come away from those experiences deeply humbled because I think to myself, okay, right, I'm in the right conversation.
Yeah.
And I'm glad to be of service to this person because that person, you just don't even know what they're going to do when they leave that workshop,
Right.
what they're going to say, who they're going to meet and influence again. So that's one set of services. And then the other set of services, so I mean, it's three. So there's also the blueprint, like helping companies create a blueprint for being more sustainable or more life-centered.
Okay.
And that usually involves pulling together an interdisciplinary team. Right now, the major client that I'm working with is in the British Virgin Islands. They already have a blue economy strategy for their organization. They happen to be a college and we're working with them on their rebrand and on an upcoming campaign. And they're one of the most inspiring brands that I've worked with to date.
Whoa.
So, yeah, so imagine being on an island with 30,000 people, first of all. Imagine that. Imagine then that your island gets pretty much decimated by a hurricane. What do you do? And this college actually reverse engineered all of their programs to not only be ecologically gentle and regenerative, so replanting mangroves, ensuring that they're not creating any negative impact on the land or on the sea, especially because their territory is more ocean, it's more water than land,
Wow.
as is so many Caribbean islands.
Yeah.
But then they actually sat and reverse engineered all of their courses to create vocational courses that then trained people on the island to rebuild the island.
That's amazing.
And I was floored when I heard this. So they did this, and on top of which, things like their construction techniques are more climate resilient than some of the other islands. So they're actually trying to do it in such a way that they we'll have less damage next time,
Yeah.
because unfortunately with things like hurricanes, they do happen, they do continue to happen. So hopefully
Yeah.
not for many more years. Um, but I mean, it really speaks to their tenacity, ingenuity, and decision making,
Yeah.
the strength of decision making. Like
Yeah.
they could have just said, okay, yeah, poop happens, terrible things
Mm-hmm.
happen, let's rebuild. And they just said, how do we make the most of this? Who are
Right.
we as a people?
Right.
What's the legacy we want to leave?
Mm-hmm.
And this incredible thing.
That's powerful.
I
Yeah.
mean, I'm super humbled by it. I really wish, and my hope really with how we do things like the marketing, the branding, and the storytelling around it is that it's going to create a template for other islands. Like other people are going to want to do this. I mean, it's why I tend to aim for market leaders. So anyone who is actually trying to do something pioneering in their market, because then when they create that success story, someone else is going to be inspired and want to do it and actually see a way to do it and say, okay, yeah, I think I could do that. I might be
Yeah.
able to do that.
Yeah.
But it takes guts,
Yeah.
and clarity of vision, and someone has to make the decision.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And having that template is really powerful too, because then everyone else doesn't have to start from scratch.
That's right.
And yeah,
We just
that's,
don't
yeah.
we just don't have the time. That's really
Right.
how I feel about it
Yeah.
now. It's just, the more of this we can synergize, the better. So,
Yeah, and a lot of these islands are at the forefront of the effects of climate change, as I'm sure
exactly.
you're aware because you're living it.
Yes, yes, yes. I mean, fortunately, Trinidad is the southernmost island in the Caribbean. So I live in Trinidad and Tobago. Specifically, I live on the island of Trinidad. And the hurricanes tend to veer north and south of us, but every
Mm,
now and again, you get like, a major tropical storm. We get mild earthquakes because obviously we're on the Caribbean
right.
plate and the fault line and all that. Higher up the chain of islands, though, you really see how, for example, Dominica was also decimated by the same hurricane, when Hurricane Maria that year.
Mm-hmm.
I think it was 2018. And Dominica have had to rebuild more than once, you know,
Wow.
um, and that's just incidents. But then you also have things like the coastal erosion,
Yep.
and how that infringes on people's lives. Then there's things like species die off.
Yep. Yep.
I've noticed less of certain kinds of animals, and then abundance of other kinds of life forms like sargassum seaweed. For some reason, there's just like
Mm.
so much of it now because of the changes in the temperatures of the water.
Whoa.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's interesting to see it because it's just, you just know it's something bigger than you,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah, which can be very daunting, but I think that's an interesting point too of this idea of looking to nature is like can be comforting in these situations of like there are time tested solutions in
Hmm.
nature, given that the organisms and life around us is constantly evolving. But there are also
Exactly.
organisms that are evolving to these changes that we can learn from, which is really interesting.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. I mean, they've figured
Yeah.
out how to do it.
Yeah.
The proof is in the pudding. They're all
Yeah.
here.
Right. Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah. The ones that are still around. we can
Yes.
we can learn a lot from.
Yes. Yes, we definitely can.
You
We
mentioned
definitely can.
something with the work on the in the college you mentioned for the British Virgin Islands about this idea, and you didn't use the term, but I'm curious about kind of what your thoughts are around the idea around resilience and what that means for these
Mm,
different communities and how we could use life-centered design and biomimicry as kind of a tool, a platform in which to build these resilient systems around.
yeah, I mean, that's really one of my favorite topics to speak on. I talk about, I mean, I did it last year, or the year before, I guess, for the NASA Bioscene. To me, the
Yeah.
Caribbean actually, it embodies something beyond, I should say, resilience, which is anti-fragility,
Mm.
and this
Mm-hmm.
idea that, because there's resilience, which is, I guess, the textbook definition of resilience is around bouncing back from shocks and
Right.
impacts, right? And becoming the same. Whereas I found it really fascinating when I came across this term of anti-fragility, which was around coming back better from the shocks.
Mm.
And I certainly don't wish those shocks on anybody. Like he does have some disclaimers in there, like to a point, like
Right.
nobody's trying to like argue for, lots and lots of shocks and bad
Right. Yeah.
impacts. But there is definitely, I think it's increasingly important that we look for these things, and
Yeah.
they're actually not even, I don't think that they are half as complex or theoretical or difficult as people may think them to be.
Mm.
Resilience to me is very simple. It's about unconditional love, actually.
Mm.
If we unconditionally loved each other and we unconditionally loved nature, how would we actually behave?
Right. Yeah.
How would we operate commercially? We
Yeah.
wouldn't do half the things that we do
Right.
today. And I think when we think about resilience in our minds, it's like this tough shell, and it's like, oh yeah, you can withstand, like, I don't know, bullets.
Yeah.
But resilience is also like hugely about softness,
Right. Yeah.
about joy, about suppleness.
Yeah.
And what struck me, like, for example, in speaking to the folks over in the BVI, was just how much they love what they do.
Yeah.
And they didn't really talk about, like, yeah, we're rebuilding the island and with this, that. Like, they spoke about it very casually, like this was just their everyday lives.
Right.
And the way that they spoke about the school and about the territory, which is to say the island, the water, because it's like 60 islands,
Yeah.
they just, it was just so clear that they just unconditionally loved each other. They loved where they lived, and they were prepared to do whatever was necessary.
Yeah. And that can be so powerful, so much more powerful than this idea of being quote unquote impenetrable, right? It's like, actually,
Yeah,
what are the relations we're building with each other and the planet? I love that.
that's right. That's right.
Yeah.
If we remember that, then everything else just becomes academic, you
Right.
know? It's just an exercise.
Mm-hmm. I have a few more questions. I'd love
Mhm,
to.
mhm.
I see a lot
Sure.
on your social media, some really beautiful photos of nature. So one of
Yeah.
my big questions that I'm asking a lot of the folks I'm interviewing is kind of ways that you are reconnecting with nature, connecting with nature, ways you find relation to nature.
Oh, yeah. Well, I do that all the time. I mean, gosh, I'm kind of spoiled. That's, I mean, I'm lucky, when I think back to like my days in New York City, I mean, I would struggle. Yeah, I
Yeah,
mean, I
yeah.
adored, yeah, there's gorgeous trees and everything there, but I mean, it's not the same as like,
Mm-mm.
you look up and there's a hill and there's like just this wall of palm trees
Yeah.
everywhere. We're lucky in the Caribbean in that way. It still feels very wild. But I mean, we have a small garden. I live at my family's home. It's my family's home for about 50 years now.
Oh,
So
wow.
yeah, so it's a strong feeling of rootedness and groundedness. So when I really, really want to reconnect, I just go walk barefoot in my yard and look at trees that have been there for more than my life. And just remember that they're still there. There's some
Mm-hmm.
royal palms in my yard that are really happy and chilling. Um, and just seeing things that my father would have planted, decades ago, still
Mm.
there, and all the birds coming into the garden, and the wild parrots at sunset and dawn. And then when I want to be a little more intentional, I go for walks, and sometimes I'll go. There's a really beautiful hill that overlooks the city, called Lady Chancellor Hill, and then that also ends at the start of a trail that goes through some hills.
Oh, wow.
Yes, I usually do the 2 mile walk. It's like 2.5 miles up and down, maybe once, twice a week. And I mean, it always just clears my head. The sounds of things like the crickets.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the birds. Like I'm always astounded, but you could drive pretty much anywhere in the city of Port of Spain, drive for like maybe 5, 10 minutes and find an area that feels like you're inside of a jungle.
I love that.
Yeah, yeah, this is tropical life, and
Yeah.
all the jungle sounds are there.
Yeah.
Multiple species of birds, tons of insects. Yeah, and then of course, you're always seeing the water in the distance. Water is my favorite, of course. Get into the
Mm-hmm.
ocean. It's my
Yeah.
favorite way to reconnect with nature because Yeah, having a beach day and just, you know, body surfing is like,
Mm-hmm.
I just forget that I'm even human, you know?
Right. And I think just like being in or around or near water is like it is so powerful and so moving on so many different levels. I miss the ocean dearly.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, yeah. I can imagine for
Yeah, I'm a
you.
little inland right
Yeah.
now.
Yeah. Just a little.
Just a little. It's currently like 2 degrees outside.
Oh, yeah, I hear you. I hear you. We're having a strange dry season in that it's a little rainier than normal, even though they predicted drier than normal.
Oh,
So, but it's not 2 degrees. It's not 2 degrees.
yeah.
So, yeah.
I was gonna say, I think something I'm super excited about that I didn't realize until I lived in places with seasons, which is new for me,
Mm.
is that because of the winter, we're gonna have a really beautiful spring, and that's something I'm looking forward to. You know, life is just gonna
Yeah.
explode after this cold,
Yes.
snowy, dormant winter, and that is something I've never experienced. So stay tuned.
Oh, it's so cool.
Yeah,
Yeah. I mean, I fell in love with the winter when I lived in New York. I really did.
yeah.
The
I think you have
quietness of
to.
it.
It's like
Yes,
part of it is
it's
like
true.
part of my mentality is like I am falling in love with the winter for sure, but I think to a certain extent it's like yeah, I'm adapting to this new ecosystem in which I live, but yeah,
Mm.
I feel like New York winters all would hit different.
Yeah, yeah. But lots of, indoor fun,
Yeah,
dinners and
yeah.
that kind of thing. There's all this social life stuff. But I think the trickiest thing is the light
Yeah, yep,
deprivation.
yep.
Yeah, yeah. So once you manage that, it's fairly okay. Just take naps.
Mhm.
Just take uncharacteristic naps. Just be like, yeah, you know what? It's hibernation
It
mode for
is.
me.
Yeah. I mean,
Yeah,
animals do it, some plants do it. It's
that's
like
right.
learning from that. It's important.
That's right. That's right.
All right, Giselle, last question. And this is also something I'm asking folks just because as I'm aiming to share these knowledges and these learnings with everyone, I'm aiming to share kind of best resources or things that you suggest. Basically, do you have any recommendations? It could be books or websites that you frequently turn to that you can recommend to other folks who are interested in getting more ingrained in life centered or biomimicry design.
Oh, sure, sure. Well, I mean, for me, the one that I turn to the most is definitely Bruce Mao. The work of Bruce Mao. So he would have written the first book I picked up by him was called Massive Change.
Mm.
And, he really is student of inflection. So he runs this design studio called I believe it's the Institute Without Boundaries.
Mm-hmm.
And the way that he approaches his design practice with Massive Change, basically what he did was he almost redesigned industries and he created something called a manifesto for massive change. And I turn to that fairly frequently because I really think that, you know, the time factor is always there. And I think you've got to be strategic and very intentional, deeply intentional and centered around what we're doing.
Yeah.
So if you're going to take action, let it be action that's going to have the biggest impact that you can make.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's why I've continuously landed inside of business and corporate because for me, it really is where I add the most value.
Yeah.
But also, I believe it's such a huge opportunity. That's where so much change is going to happen
Right.
because its reach is just so enormous,
Yeah.
right? So I turn to that. I turn to Confessions of a Radical Industrialist
Mm-hmm.
and the work of Ray Anderson and just remembering that, okay, yeah, someone did this. Someone
Yeah.
did this with something really, really hard.
Mm-hmm. And
You
there's people
know,
in these industries and these big companies that are passionate about this and that are creating change,
yeah.
and they have the capacity to.
Yes, yes. And I just got Neri Oxman's Material Ecology, which is absolutely gorgeous. So
Awesome.
that's looking at architecture, tech, and life-centered design. And then one last one I would suggest to anyone who wants to have kind of a intimate understanding is of the Caribbean is this book called So Many Islands.
Mm.
And it's a collection of short stories and poems by Caribbean authors, and it's just very moving. If you really want to understand the visceral nature of a place, I think you've got to read its poetry.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that.
And it taught me things that I didn't I took for granted in a way about where I live. So yeah, so that's one for me for sure.
Those are great recommendations. Well, thank you so much, Giselle.
Yay.
This was so fun and informative and moving. I'm coming away from this more inspired and motivated.
Oh, thank you so much, Lily. Yeah, I mean, me too, actually.
Yeah.
Sometimes these things live in your head, but you don't get to talk about them.
Yeah, and I'm glad we get to
So,
share them with our network and even beyond. It's just like these practices can be so life-changing and yeah, really
yeah,
impactful.
they certainly changed my life. So I'm
Agreed.
just hoping to return the favor. So,
Awesome. And with that, another epic episode is out in the world. I've been feeling really grateful recently for such a beautiful and supportive community. So, special shout out to everyone who is listening and sharing, reviewing, and telling friends or family how cool biomimicry is. Let's change the world together.